Hello, hello. Welcome to cEDH Budget Brews. Tonight, I am joined with my friend James, also known as Squirrelmob. Say hey, James.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
So, after we got done brewing up our budget deck together, we kind of got chatting, and I thought it might be worth us having a little conversation about um, one of James's major projects, besides helping organize monthly meetups pre-COVID, of course, for the Michigan. For Michigan and a bunch of other stuff, moderating things and doing stuff, is he spends a lot of time working on the cEDH Metagame Project. So for those of you that don't know, I'd like to ask James to tell us a little bit about that Metagame Project.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Metagame Project is a crowdsourced data gathering project where
Okay.
I have players submit games using an online form, and using
Which
the
is
games that
on
they
the screen
submit.
right here.
Yeah, and using the games they submit, I take a look at that, and every month I put out a little report just saying kind of what the submitted games look like. If we consider that a metagame. Now, the reason I say a metagame and not the metagame is because we don't have information from everybody everywhere, right?
Right, we
There's
only have the
thousands
people
of
who submit.
yeah, there's probably thousands of cEDH games played every week, and I get maybe 100, maybe 200 a month. So
Right.
we're talking about a small slice of the pie here.
A very small slice of pie, and like is on the screen here, you do this really nice write-up and you kind of just talk about an overview and different types of games and what's submitted. You crunch some numbers,
Mm-hmm.
do some things, talk about like win rate of different positions in the pods. Like, I've always kind of found it interesting that player 2 and player 3 are only slightly ahead of player 4 most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the
And
whole
player
like
one's
shebang.
way out in front.
Yeah, especially now that Flash is gone.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and then like the amount of turns between the submitted list to kind of help give you like the overall tempo of the submitted
Mm-hmm.
games, which is kind of
Right.
nice. And
And
the form is pretty simple. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. What
yeah.
were you gonna
Oh
say?
no, it's all good. Yeah, and the thing that's nice about some of that information, because when we break it down into like the individual decks later on, we're talking about smaller and smaller sample sizes, so it becomes a little bit harder to draw any sort of conclusions from it. So
Right.
really, a lot of that analysis is speculation. Basically, like, if the numbers are true, this is what it could mean. But
And
with
it's
the
opinion
stuff
based
like,
like all things.
yeah, but with the player advantage and how long games are going and how games are ending, the sample size is large enough that we can start to say, all right, we've seen some consistent trends. What does that mean?
Right.
Even across bigger and bigger samples.
Right. And over month to month to month, you can kind of see trends. You can just kind of see like I personally kind of have an opinion of the like what I see a lot online is that I see that there's really like 3 or 4 like if you were to kind of break it up like biology, where like you have like kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
genus, and all that, like at the kingdom level of what the cEDH, like what the metagame looks like, you have online, offline first. Offline is broken up via like local play group and then like large meetups, which aren't in existence right now, but the local play group thing still goes on sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have an online meta, which is webcam, and non-webcam, which is predominantly cockatrice. And across those, you will see different, like, not only will you see different power levels and a lot of variation, but you'll see completely distinctly different things. Like, a local playgroup might very much just play the decks you have, play the cards you have, and there's not a lot of variation week to week. Whereas like large meetups, they don't meet as frequently. They probably meet like once or twice a
Yeah,
month, maybe
you could
once a
play
week.
5 games and have 4 different decks at every single pod you play at one of those.
But they all might bring the same 3 or 4. But people probably still, again, a lot of times tend to stick to a certain wheelhouse of like,
yeah,
these are predominantly the cards I own. These are predominantly the cards I play. Even if they're a proxy-friendly meta, they will still, like, I generally only play these style of decks. Like, no matter how much I want to pretend, like, I just like playing mid-range all the time.
And there's
Dirtle and draw cards, I'm good.
And there's a trap that some people fall into online. At least, I personally think it's a trap. Other people might disagree with me, but a lot of people will talk about the cEDH metagame. And I think that's a trap because, for the reasons you mentioned, any cEDH metagame is actually comprised of hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller individual metagames. Yes. Each local group is a metagame. Like, I have a group where pre-COVID, so a year ago, right. When we played, we have a set of between the 4 or 5 or 6 of us, probably about 30 different decks, maybe even 40 different decks. But that's a small number. Right. And some of them were very fringe. Very, very fringe.
Well, and not only that, like, you're not gonna build 5 new decks every time you guys meet.
Exactly. It's like, what do we have? What do we have proxied? Whereas if you look at something like the cEDH Nexus or Play EDH or the subreddit Discord, those each have their own distinct metagames, which are slightly different from each other and are different than what might be my local metagame. And across all of them, there are similarities, but there are still some striking differences.
A lot of variation from what I've seen. So, like, I've been kind of playing a little bit kind of on, like, smaller Discords, just, like, with different people lately. And a lot of the local play groups, like, the decks will kind of be, like, 1 or 2 cEDH decks, probably missing a few cards, even if they're proxy and they're just... Mm-hmm. Didn't think of it, didn't know it, just didn't like it, whatever, so it's not in there. Maybe like 1 or 2 high power decks. You got that one guy who all he wants to do is play Tree Folk no matter what. But he's been your buddy since middle school, so you're going to keep inviting him around. Mm-hmm. So now you've got like Turbo Naws versus, Weatherseed Tree Folk versus CST versus Narset, because the dude's been playing Narset for 6 years, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm just... Yeah. That's not a shot at you, Sean. That's just a joke.
Now, one of my buddies from our local play group, who's been a great friend of mine for a long time. Shout out to Dean. He has run for a very long time 2 cEDH decks. One of them is Najeela, which is pretty solid. It's a gold standard cEDH deck. With and he doesn't pull any punches with it. And the other is mono white Lin Civi, which is very fringe. It can win games, but it's different. And he cycles between them, plays them differently. I think he built Opus Thief at one point in time too. Now, again, granted, this was
Dean's the judge, right? Isn't Dean the judge? Yeah.
Granted, we haven't played for over a year because COVID, but at the same time, I might play 4 or 5 different decks in an evening because I've got a bunch of them built with proxies. We got another guy in the local play group who has like 16 or 17 different ones built. And even though Dean has the collection to play whatever, he plays things he enjoys. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's the way to play, whether it's EDH, cEDH, whatever. Play what makes you happy, but if you're playing cEDH, you got to make sure that it fits and can actually hang at a table. Which, of course, Lin Civi is fringe, but it can hang.
But... So there's another counterpoint with that, is that, like, if Dean goes and takes Lin Civi, and that deck will not hang in certain metas.
True.
And also, like, maybe that's not the play experience everybody wants. Like, maybe 3 players are sitting down and they don't want to play 3DH because the mono white deck is, like, not the best mono white deck out there to begin with.
And you have to, a lot of people will say, well, cEDH doesn't have a rule 0 or whatever. It's like, well, that's not really true, right? You still want to have a certain experience, right? I don't want to have to play against, 3 other copies of, say, Rog Silas in a game. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Somebody sits down with Turbonos, no problem. 3 of the same deck, I just don't really want to do that.
Well, and even it's just like there's like a certain expectation that goes into it, and like that's one of the things you got to realize as the new player at the play group. And this is one of the things like I have kind of tried to, when I'm the new guy at the play group, I try to make sure that what I'm doing is in line with what the play group wants to do. Otherwise, I just won't come back. I mean, I'm not going to be an ass. I'm not going to shit on somebody for their play group doing what their play group wants to do, but that kind of brings us into why I wanted to talk about this. So where this applies to budget cEDH or getting into cEDH from a beginner's perspective is I wrote a couple of like philosophy docs over the last few months. And kind of a lot of the points that are kind of get hammered home in it is that what you can play and what will give you results aren't necessarily the same thing, and what you can get away with is not necessarily like you want to play, you want your play group's powering up, or you go to a new play group and they're way more powered up than your last play group, and you want to be able to kind of hang with them. Like where you are on the spectrum or how much leeway you have with what you can get away with is very much dependent on where they're at. Like I wouldn't take a $500 Lin Civi list and go play with the Finns.
No, you got to be able. If this is especially true with fringe decks, the fringier it is, the less you can afford to budget with it. Is really my feeling. Well, if you're going way off the beaten path, like if you're playing Lin Civi or even mono white Heliod, like you might think, oh well, it's a monocolor deck. It's going to cost me less. Yes, your mana base is going to cost less, but where you're lacking in color identity, you have to make up in raw power with your cards
and speed,
and a lot of those are expensive
and streamlined. Yeah, and you have to have those bells and whistles. The reason why I bring up the Finns is because they tend to play a lot of like fast storm-based decks, and playing a mono white Rebels deck like that might be okay, and like in a play group that wants to play a lot of like mid range, like a lot of like evolution or a lot of it's like Thrasios Tymna mid range. Like
it's a stacks deck. If you play it into a meta where you're likely to run up against 2 or more fast combo decks, any stacks decks isn't going to have a great time in that place, and one that's slightly lower power to begin with is really gonna struggle.
And also, those decks tend to be like super optimized. No, you could probably get away with playing a $500 Lin Civi list against $500, like my $500 Cass. They would probably punch a little bit. You might be on the. It might be even then still might be a little like, dude, can you not like? But at the same time, the thing was like where you can kind of how much leeway you have with what you can play and what you want to start out with is very much dependent upon your meta and what your meta consists of.
Right. And I think one of the big things that you bring up in some of your budget work is that budget decks, we have to expect them to be a little bit slower. And when we think about that, in terms of what data we have from the Meta Project, and again, it's not perfect data, but based on what we've seen, there is a trend that games typically end between turn 4 and turn 6. That's like the sweet spot. And if you're running 2 turns behind other cEDH decks, they're close to closing out the game by the time they get to turn 3.
Right.
And if you're running 2 turns behind that, you got to think about what you're doing.
So, according to your latest report with the data submitted, which was a total of 432 games, you have listed that 0.93% of games end turn 0, turn 1.
Mm-hmm.
9.26% end on turn 2. 16% on turn 3, turn 4. 18% on turn 5. And then it starts to drop down. Turn 6 is 12%, and then goes down from there to somewhere between 8 and 10%, roughly.
Yeah. And really, the longer the game goes, the less of a chance that a cEDH game has going that long. Right. Because they're going to end fast, usually.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much by time you eat up all of the turn 1 through 6 percentages, I mean, the turn 7 through 10 is less than, I mean, obviously because it's, but I mean, basically once you get to turn 4, like you've eaten up 30-40% of the total percentage anyway.
Games going 8 turns or longer are less than 20% of the submitted games. So that means that out of every 5 games on average, less than 1 of them is hitting turn 8.
Right. So that's the thing. So like one of the big points is that like that I've noticed like playing on like smaller private discords or like little community discords for like a state or a region or like a city. Like the decks tend to be a little bit slower overall. They tend to not adapt as quickly. Not to say they don't, but just kind of as a a rule of thumb. Mm-hmm. Because like that's the thing. So like if you kind of like how I broke it up into 4 different categories with, non-webcam, webcam, large meetup, small meetup. The meta that changes the fastest is the non-webcam online, and there's a lot of like testing and innovation and all of those kind of things. But like,
and it makes sense because it's the easiest to change. You don't have to physically change cards. You click a handful of buttons, and your deck is done.
You play 10 games, and you're not shuffling, and like the basic mechanics are a lot quicker as well. So you tend to aggregate a lot of games a lot faster. But like that meta is going to look way different in 3 weeks. So a deck that was good February 1st or March 1st is either obsolete or so far behind the meta that it might loop back around and be good, but it's not like on that cutting edge. But also at the same time, there's a lot of dead ends that happens with all that testing and innovation. I guess one of the things,
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing where, so in competitive formats, we see tournaments happen, and tournaments drive the innovation, right? So you've got like your week 0 meta, your week 1 meta, your week 2 meta, and you're trying to be 1 or 2 steps ahead, right? So Patrick Chapin called it the next level, right? So you want to be the next level of whatever's happening.
Remember Next Level Blue?
Yeah, that deck was sweet.
I love that.
That deck was awesome. Anyways, in cEDH, we obviously don't have that. Even when we have big events, the sample sizes are so small, and there's so much luck involved with any cEDH game. Seeding order, what you draw, it's multiplayer. It's a ton is up to chance. Which
people
you have to
hands. Did somebody make a egregious misplay that screwed up the guy who could have won if everybody played optimally? Like
exactly.
Yada, yada. Yeah, there's a lot of variables.
But we do have something that provides some of that effect that is similar to like SCG results for standard. And what we have are our massive pool of online gameplay content providers. Yes. They drive discussion on different things that happen. So, for example, just a recent example is the resurgence of Sire of Insanity. And I think that started with, I think it was Rebel.
Yeah,
but
it was.
Shout out to Rebel. Rebels
Yep.
content is great.
You are the John Stewart of cEDH, and you know it.
Oh
That's why I
man, it's
call
so
it.
good. But now we see Sire of Insanity being tested in a lot of places,
I still play it in
and
Pod.
well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was always acceptable in Pod,
Yeah.
but
I just like fatties.
we see it in other decks trying to take advantage of wheels and things like that. And it's right now it's experimentation.
Right.
Is it right? Is it wrong? Who knows? But we see that experimentation point being pushed, but instead
Right.
of being results oriented, it's oriented around things that look cool because
Right.
content creators promote them.
Right. So that was kind of the thing was like I found with the from so like the cEDH games Discord. I was recently I this will come out after the video is released, but I recorded a budget Kalia build with him. And the CH game Discord, like they do like a weekly league, and they post their results. I wish they would submit them to the forum, but like the Nexus has the Oracle bot, PlayDH started up a ranked ladder again, and they've had the subreddit Discord.
Mm-hmm.
They've had the Asperia for years, playing what Power has like. So there's these, and even that the data collection is pocketed if you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
so results will vary, and like what you can play, and what will give you the most bang for your buck, like budget wise, especially starting out, and what will give you the best upgrade path, like long term, will all be dependent upon all of that data and all of like what you play, who you know, what you know, that kind of stuff.
right.
Um, like for example, a good one that I often bring up is that like dork based ramp will give you a lot more bang for your buck than artifact based ramp will, because like out of the big good
Yeah,
rocks, like you
Mana Crypt is expensive. Mana Vault is expensive. Mox Diamond is really expensive.
yeah, I mean, so like let's say the big four is Chromox, Mox Diamond, Mana Vault, and Soul Ring, right?
Yeah,
Like two of those are over $50,
yeah,
and one of them is two like I think $400, $300, somewhere
yeah.
by
Mox
that.
Diamond is ridiculous.
Mana Crypt is like 80. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and Mana Vault and Chromox are high 40s, $50. Like they kind of float around there.
Yeah.
Whereas like you can get a Noble Hierarch for, I mean, even when Noble Hierarch was at its highest, it was still $40.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with
Yeah.
Bloom Tartar, it was $40.
Mm-hmm.
And those are like those are two of the like premier
Premiere. Right.
dorks
Exactly.
in the meta, like
Yeah.
followed by like Birds and Deathrite, which are ten
Pretty
dollars
cheap.
and $3.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get a lot more oomph by using dorks, but also like again, your deck is slower,
Mm.
but it'll scale better. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
And there's some considerations to take in with that too. Like if you're playing something that's going to be slower, a consideration is would it be appropriate for your deck to skew towards slowing the game down rather than pushing the tempo?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It will, and you can get a lot of, so like I mean playing a dork on one and then a dork on two is not the worst thing you can do in Magic. Like
Mm.
now playing against a bunch of dockside, like, but if you took that same like I've tested essentially like decks from like that. I took the same deck that I've played budgetless, like fully optimized, like my personal build. I stripped it all the way down to 500. Then I upped it to 750, upped it to 1,000, and upped it to like 1,500. And to be able to really realistically like semi decently hang with like play DH decks, Nexus decks, like just any like predominantly online proxy meta, I guess is like a good term for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would need to play like $1,000 budget if I'm playing Sans Blue, and
Yeah.
if I'm playing with Blue, I probably need to go like 1,200 to 1,500. And
Yeah.
at that point, I might as well just proxy.
Right.
But I
Because
mean,
at that point, what are you locked out of? You're locked out of like
dual
a
lands
couple
and Mox
a
Diamond
couple rocks,
essentially.
duels, and Twister if you're going that direction. Right?
Yeah, yes. So basically,
Twister.
like once you hit about $1,000 or $1,500, like what you're missing is you're missing all the OG dual lands. You might be able to get like one of them, like one of the off-color non-blue ones. Mox Diamond and like Grim Monolith, Twister. Like you really still can't play like a good Turbo Nos list, but you could play like a pretty reasonable like CST. You could play a pretty reasonable like Curious Control, even Najila. You know, like those lists. Like Kess is okay without Diamond and Grim Monolith and Twister. You know, you can do it. It's okay. It's just not as good.
Yeah.
I found
the faster you want to go, the more that you are hampered by your budget.
Yep. No, that's not to say that you can't like go fast and you don't get fast hands because like
I mean like Angie can be a pretty fast deck and it's red black and has 40 cards that jointly cost what 20 or $35 because you're playing all the madness cards, which aren't very good.
That Kalia list that we built, and we were goldfishing some hands last week, or a couple weeks ago, and we were popping off turn 2, turn 3, but it was a lot of these very complicated, convoluted lines, and the cards were completely dead other than when we were doing the thing. Because you have to stitch your supplier and calling of the week. And those are things you see in fully optimized lists, but we don't have Necropotence and Sylvan Library and Vamp Tutor and Demonic Tutor necessarily to get us to that.
And one thing you lose with that is a lot of the flexibility. Like one of the things that a lot of these Turbo Nas and Breach decks have are a number of different lines. So they're difficult to play because you have to kind of build what you're doing as you're doing it.
Yeah, you have to assemble it.
Right, and when you budget, you really have to pull out a lot of the pieces that have redundancy and flexibility to get down.
Yeah.
Right, so you really get railroaded into one path.
And you can build it back in somewhat, but again, we were doing you'll just have to watch the video when it comes out. They did a great job. I helped a little bit. They did most of it, and they they were able to play the lines a lot more efficiently than I could. To be honest, I'm not even gonna pretend. But again, at the same time, you could definitely tell they were amazed it was performing as well as it was, but also they definitely could notice that it was not they get stopped by any piece of interaction, or they would they would stumble and then we would reset the thing, or maybe they're going off turn 4 instead of turn 3 because of, or a lot of them was oh, we got dockside, we're good, you know what I mean? So you're kind of relying on these same 1 or 2 cards, which admittedly you're relying on in a budget list build too, but now you have 5 tutors to get to it versus 3.
You bring up a really good point there, too, that a lot of people like to overlook. Player skill still matters, right? There's a lot that is up to chance, but one thing that I think is greatly underrated is familiarity and comfort with a list, right? Because a lot of people want to play the hot new flavor, right? Turbo Nas is the hot new flavor right now. Not that it's new, but
I was gonna say it's not new. It's at least 9 months old at this point,
right? But a lot of people are transitioning to different Nas lists when maybe they don't have a ton of experience.
And Nas has been around for years and people have played it, but it's really vogue right now.
Right, exactly, because there's a lot of new tools that it's gotten in the last year that make it a lot better. Yeah. And I played the Inala Nas deck for a while, and when I was starting off with it, it was really odd because it's not something that I typically play, and so I know that I lost a lot of potential opportunities with it because of some of that lack of familiarity. Where on the other hand, you have somebody like Michael Levine or Levine. I'm not sure how he pronounces
Michael
his name. Levine? Okay.
Levine.
He plays the Heliod Stacks deck. He's kind of the progenitor of that mono white stacks archetype. And he's played it to top fours in multiple big events, right? Like we don't have a lot of big cEDH events, but he's done really well again and again with a deck that on the surface
consistently.
Yeah. With a deck that's on the surface, we might say, huh, that's odd. Maybe this seems a little weak compared to some other things. But knowing the deck and knowing the style and knowing what other people are doing is a huge advantage.
Yeah, and so it kind of feeds on each other. It's like, so like one of the first things I always recommend is, what do you normally play? Okay, I play, it's not always. I'm being hyperbolic. It's the Dirtily Dinosaur deck. Okay, so let's go to the next step. What colors do you play? What colors do you like to play? And then you kind of work from there. So it's like, what colors do you like to play? What kind of strategies do you normally play? Do you play like Stompy? Do you play Weenie Aggro? Do you play like Ramp Big Dumb Dudes? Do you play Hard Control? Like whatever that is. And then you kind of compare it to like what you play against versus what's available. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, these are like the 3 or 4 established choices you really have to work with. Sometimes they go with it, sometimes they don't. Usually when they do, they're like, thanks.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when they don't, they even say that because they get a better performance because it's more focused and they've had some help from like more established players. But at the same time, I kind of like, but if all they normally play is, black red aggro and they hate blue and they don't even play like they play aggro black red, like not stacks, not combo, not storm, not any of that, just like
I'm turning ball lightning sideways.
Right. Yeah, but in Commander, they're playing Croxa because he's a 6/6 kind of thing.
Yeah,
those kind of guys.
The Rakdos Lord of Riots, or whichever one, the one that makes your stuff cost less.
The Rakdos tattoo guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We've all got that friend.
Yeah, that brings me to something else that I've started doing in the project. Now, I'm not going to put a lot of stake in these numbers because it's 366 games and it's categorized by me, so there's bias in both what's submitted and how I'm categorizing it. But there's a section on win cons. And so I would suggest to people, if you're new to cEDH, you don't necessarily need to look at like what I've done. Like personally, I think it's good, but that's just me.
Right. I gotcha.
But if you're new to cEDH, budget or not, you should be aware of what some of the other decks are doing.
Yeah, well, deck familiarity is a big thing, but also like that first like initial jumping in. It is a lot of dependent upon what your opponents are playing and what you're familiar with. Like if you play blue-white control all the time, I'm not going to try to sell you Jund, Corval, Doomsday.
No, but I'm going to say, you need to be aware that, blue-white control might not do what you want it to do if you are running into a pod of, say, a lot of Oracle Console, because you're going to have to rely on counter spells to answer that, because there's not many other answers.
No.
Whereas if you're playing against Gitrog, a well-timed piece of, a well-timed swords to plowshares, your dollar piece of removal.
Like if you're playing blue-white control, you probably, honestly, if you're playing blue-white control against a lot of console decks, you should probably think about like Stifle effects.
Yeah, Stifle effects.
Angel's Graze.
What's that? Wingmare Griff, something like that. The one that's like a torpor orb on wings.
Hushwing Griff or whatever.
Hushwing Griff. There we go. Yeah.
I prefer the spell based stifle effects just because.
Right. There's arguments in both directions, but whatever the case is, you should be aware that like traditional interaction sometimes isn't going to be able to get you there, and you have to think kind of in multiple dimensions at once.
Right, and oftentimes as the new person entering in, you are the person least qualified to make those calls.
Also true.
Which is where I come in. and the duck helpers and stuff like that, and they kind of help people aggregate that out a little bit, based on availability and time.
Right.
And so I guess where I was kind of going with this was that, like, that first initial decision on what you're going to build is highly, highly important, but you need to have accurate data for your play group or the expected play group that you're going into, and what decks you normally play. Like, if you play Burn in every format you play, pick up Godo. Just pick up Godo. Like, it's the closest you're going to get. It's probably more like Dragon Stompy than Burn, but it'll be the closest analog. It's kind of a slow combo deck, it's got some hate pieces, and it
if
has
you can count to 20 in Legacy, you can count to 11 in CEDH.
And protect it. Make sure you can protect it before you count to 11 and just go, please. Yeah. But I digress. Or if you play mono green, all everything. If you play elves in every Eternal format you play like Selvala is a good fit, but it doesn't have elf. Like, it's not an elf deck. But one of the big kind of differences between Commander and all of the 1v1 formats is you're trying to deal 120 damage. 120
or find
damage.
a way to circumvent that, right?
There's no way to circumvent it.
I mean, there is if you win the game.
Well, you have to have a combo.
Exactly. There's got to be a way to actually close the game out.
There's no whatever that combo is, like, you just have to have it, because you need to deal 120 damage if you're trying to deal damage, or you have like that's why console Oracle's so big.
Right. And one of the things that I've seen from people who are newer to the format is the idea that, I'm going to play this hard control stacks deck, I'm going to establish a lock, and that's my win condition. It's not, right? A lock isn't a win condition. A lock, in most cases, isn't even a hard lock. Now, there are a handful that are, like, truly hard locks, but they're hard to assemble.
Yeah. And you also have to remember that you have 3 opponents interacting with it. So, like, that was one of the things that, like, so I've played a lot of Godo, I've played a lot of Blood Pod, so I've played a lot of, like, like these Staxy prison style decks. And one of the things that you have to kind of always keep in mind when you're playing them is that, like, your stacks piece will not affect everybody equally. In fact, my rule of thumb personally is that every time I play a hate piece, it's going to put 3 players behind, 1 player ahead. I need to make sure that I'm the player that's getting put ahead, especially if I'm not playing blue. But, like, it might hurt one person more than the other, and then one person, like, they have the piece of removal that can bounce the one piece that's negatively affecting them, but it's still the other stacks pieces you've played have kind of stopped the other guys. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not to say you can't play stacks or can't play hard control. It's just, like, your hard control has to, like, have a plan that allows you to finish the game. Like,
right.
You
that plan is what's missing a lot of times from people who are brewing their first deck. And that's not to say that, like, people shouldn't brew decks. They absolutely should. They should. It's just that you want to make sure that you have a clear, concise, and consistent goal to reach.
Yep. Yeah. And be flexible with when you go for help to, like, don't be, because oftentimes that first iteration is going to be way off what you wind up at because you've got preconceived notions from other things. Like, you have, like, when I got into Commander, I played a lot of Legacy and Vintage. So I tended to play a lot of cards that were really good in Legacy and Vintage, but were meh in Commander. or an EDH when I started playing because I'm an old man.
Yeah,
But
same.
also because I had like a way deeper card pool than everybody. Like my decks were also way more interactive. So I could afford to, like, because I had the cards and the deeper card pool, I could just one for one everybody all day and like just keep going because I'm just, because I have Necro, I have Sylvan Library, I've got all the things, and it wasn't until I started playing with players who had that same deep card pool that I was like, oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which was fine because like by that point I had intentionally started to power down my decks. Like, if I played a card like if instead of Swords of Plowshare, I played whatever Ablation or whatever the 3-drop equivalent was,
Right,
like that
right.
kind of stuff.
Back
Instead of
before they
just
got rid of the tuck rule.
yeah, well, even then, I just like just as the like spot removal, or instead of
Right.
disenchant, I'd play the 4-drop one that exiles 2. You
Mm-hmm.
know, play a 5-mana sweeper instead of just every Wrath of God ever printed.
Right, right.
But
Yeah.
anyway, I digress there. So that was kind of one of the big points. The other thing is kind of the next step that like kind of ties into this, especially with the metagame, is if you look at past trends with the metagame and kind of see where it was, you kind of get an idea of where it's going a little bit. Like we have seen over the last, like 4 or 5 updates that pretty much Grixis, Nas, XYZ, Oracle stuff has just gotten more and more and more and more prevalent, right?
It has. And what's interesting, though, is that for a number of updates from basically when Flash got banned until a couple months ago, things were getting a little bit faster and a little bit faster and a little bit faster and a little bit faster. In the last couple updates, they've gotten just a little bit slower and a little bit slower. And so another thing to remember is that there's always going to be some level of ebb and flow, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes a deck that you've built that answers a meta is going to answer that meta really well, and sometimes there's going to be adjustments and it's not going to do so well. And the other thing to think about is that no matter what you're doing, you don't want to be too results oriented in cEDH. Right. It's a 4-player game. So, if everything is perfectly even, and we know that it's not, but if everything was perfectly even at the start of a game, you'd expect to win about a quarter of your games. But that doesn't mean that if I win, or if I lose 3 games in a row, that I'm going to win the 4th one.
Right.
Right. I can go on to shout out Rebel again. Rebel had a good video about this a while back. But if you go on a losing streak for a while, you're not due anything unless you're actively working to improve your play.
Right. Well, and so that's kind of the other thing is that, like, with that ebb and flow, like, you might pick a deck and, I mean, if you're papering out and with, if you're papering it out without proxies, like, it's going to take you time. Like, nobody's got a spare $500 sitting around, because if you have a spare $500 sitting around, you'll probably just build a more expensive version of the deck, right? So you always kind of wind up with this same thing where, like, you hit like 80% of the deck built, and now you're trying to work up to that next 20%, and then you start working on your upgrades from there, if that's how your leaning is. And you that deck might start out hot and then not, and then as that ebb and flow happens, it might get better. And just being able to pilot a deck a lot of times better than your opponents is often enough to compensate. Like, Michael Levine is a great example of that. Like, if you, like, arguably white is the worst color in Commander, especially in cEDH, and
you have no arguments from me.
and maybe like the established options for mono white are Heliod and Tashar. So it could be on any given week which one is better positioned versus the other.
Right. And in any given pod too. I mean, if you play Heliod into a slightly slower pod where your stacks is more effective, that's great. If you're playing in a pod that's like all out 3 other turbo decks, if you're on Teshar, that's probably better for you because you're also playing a fast combo deck that just can
Faster,
ignore
yeah.
what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. Well, but that's like, so that was kind of like, so, but like he's getting good results pretty consistently, but that's probably because he's like fucking galaxy brain level player, and he just finds mono white a challenge. From what I've heard, I actually haven't spoken to him directly.
Yeah.
Um,
If I played it, it would not be nearly as good.
right. But the thing is that like it's still like from like a common wisdom standpoint, white is still the worst color in Commander, and especially in cEDH, that's relatively true for at least when it comes to replicatable results. So like which one of those two established options is better at any given time can change, but also like in order to get those results, you have to be a really good player. And it's the same thing with Rakdos or
Mm-hmm.
any color. I mean CST, like that's the thing about like the console decks is like while they're not necessarily forgiving, they're more forgiving than those types of strategies because to play error,
Mm-hmm.
and they're a little bit easier to pick up and kind of like get going.
And every deck kind of has a different threshold for like how much it takes to play that deck at say like 60% efficiency, right?
Right.
Like, and at 60% efficiency on any of the decks that are pretty good decks, like be it Gitrog or Elsha or a Turbo Nose deck or whatever, 60% you're
Yes.
still going to win some games.
Right. You're gonna do
But the
pretty good.
difference between 0% and 60% is probably smaller than the difference between, say, 80% and 90% with that deck. And this is
Skill
where you get
wise,
into
yeah.
like, yeah, where you get into a deck like Frog, where like I play it sometimes and I can play it competently, but like
Right.
I'm not going to go, down the rabbit hole of what happens in this specific situation with these 5 specific cards. I don't care. Like I can either figure it out on the fly or I'll lose, and that's okay.
Yeah, and it's fine. And like, and a lot of times, like I just won't. How do I like I can pilot a lot of decks like I can pilot most cEDH decks well enough to teach a new person how to play it, and then hand them off to somebody who's more experienced to refine those skills.
Right.
So, kind of what I specialize in, and where I try to lean people and try to direct the conversation is again, what do you normally play? What are you playing against? What compartment can we kind of put you in to get you on the right path?
Right.
And not waste a bunch of money and not waste a bunch of time and not waste a bunch of effort.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And
like,
who's going to be able to take you to the next step? That's another important part too, right? That is really important for the community as a whole. Is having those places like
right,
there's
connectors.
there's a lot of talk about like, oh, why are there 73 million different deck discords? But at a certain point it's kind of nice because you have certain places where somebody can go and say, well, I'm playing Godo and I want to get better at playing Godo, and we can say, here's a community of people who play Godo, they're going to help you.
Right, like
Right.
yeah, I mean that's one of the decks where, but like Frog, for example, like
Yeah.
I know the basic loops. Like I'm still
Yeah.
like I can get you. Basically, my thing is I can get you to Cozy Land, and I can walk you through how to do the basic Cozy Land stuff. But like, I fumble it up. I put extra steps in. It's definitely not as tight as it could be, but like
Yeah.
it's enough to get you like the idea, and then you can go talk to, Bendy Guy and all of those guys, and get that extra, how do I fight Anafenza? Not that anybody plays it, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
That I think it's like a 65 step loop that they've gotten down to 45, and
Right. And at a certain point, like, I have other things to worry about, so like if I can find that information somewhere,
right,
that's much more valuable to me as a player
right,
than
like
going through the effort to memorize it or anything like that.
Yeah, like funny story. Actually, speaking of new player when they first started out on budget and then wound up like taking that whole progression. You know who Play Him is, right?
Yeah.
So
You mean Time Twisted Champion Play Him?
No. I yelled at him for that and he took it away. I was like, that's unbecoming, take it away. I boomered that at him, and he was like, "All right." So some a certain 13-year-old wandered into a certain budget Discord back in like March or May, looking for help building a budget Blue Pod list. And we got talking, and then we did a voice chat, and then we kind of got started, and like, you know, I was helping him get his mana base and his like ramp right. And then I handed him off to Alton, who kind of was one of the people who spearheaded the Evolution project and kind of made Evolution like was very integral in making Evolution what it is today, and it's a very strong archetype now, and so on and so forth. And then as the joke goes, he wins the Time Twisted tournament, right? Well, I remember when he didn't realize that like Noble Hierarch was like the best dork in Sans Black. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Like,
and I mean, it just goes to show, like, and I know that we started this off kind of ribbing on him a little bit, but like, that's why not just, you know, having a bridge from budget to budgetless, whether it's things I own that I want to play with my local play group to playing online with proxies is important, but also having those community connections is really important. And, you know, when people kind of break off into these little cliques and stuff, that kind of breaks that down, because if we all want to get better, we should want everyone to get better.
Right. Well, and so, I mean, he's just like Playhim is a really good illustration of that.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, and it's really good. But part of that is like you have to be skilled enough to pick that up. But it was just kind of funny that he wanted to play Blue Pod, which essentially like Alton was champion at the time, and then has since kind of moved on to Evolution, and Evolution is one, it got a lot of love over the last year, but also like it's a much stronger like archetype than what that Blue Pod was, at least at the time.
Yeah,
I remember
I've played Blue Pod before, and it was if I were to play it now, I would change it into Evolution. Like Evolution,
like miles ahead. But
it also goes to show that just because something isn't great right now, kind of going back to that ebb and flow, Wizards is printing like 7 sets a year, 8 sets a year, or something like that.
Minimum.
Where we're going to get some new cards. Like, all right, Time Spiral Remastered is coming out soon. It doesn't have anything new, but it's got some reprints. So maybe if you're on a budget, like, maybe you're going to be able to afford that Gemstone Caverns now, because it might come down in price because it's getting reprinted.
You might just pull it in a pack.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
and
don't knock that. People buy packs.
Yeah, no, they do. They do. I bought boxes of Commander Legends. It was cool.
I'm the worst. I buy them. Like, I'll be at Walmart and I'm in the checkout and I'm like, ooh, double masters, come to me.
Yeah. And with new sets, you never know what we're going to get. I mean, at some point, we're going to get powerful white cards. I know that that's a meme online, but at some point, they will print something that will be good for white. Now, will it be Underworld Breach good? No, probably not. But it's going to be something.
It'll be something. These are all packs of these are the little Jumpstart.
Yeah.
I kept them all together. They're not the good ones, but you know, they're enough.
But yeah, Jumpstart's a great example. I mean, Allosaurus Shepherd, good lord, that card's great, and it's basically a throwaway slot in this little summer set that's supposed to be an introduction for new players. So you never know where.
Emil was in that set.
Yeah, Emil too. Yeah, good example.
Emil put Evolution on the map almost, as far as I can tell.
So you never know what's going to happen and what's going to become available with any given set.
Right.
Especially with like these new crossover sets coming, like maybe Gandalf is going to be the next big thing in cEDH. Who knows?
You never know, dude.
I'm hoping not personally, on a personal level, but you know, who knows?
Maybe, you know, or who knows? Like this new Wizard set coming out.
Strixhaven,
or whatever. Yeah. You never know.
And like when they're doing these dual-faced cards, you know, Valky and Tybalt ended up being really good in constructed formats, maybe there's going to be one that's really good for us coming out, in Strixhaven or the set
Right.
after that.
Yeah. Who knows? But and that's kind of the thing. So like that kind of and Plan's a good illustration of that. Like how that path is important. Like if he could have just kept trying to jam Blue Pod all day long, and probably would have gotten okay results. But like he listened, and then he got handed off, and then he absorbed that information too. And I've had a lot of other players do that over my tenure.
There's also a tendency with some players when they get a response online that's like, just proxy it. If you just proxy something without thinking about it, that doesn't necessarily make your deck better. Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't proxy. I think that using playtest cards is a very good way to keep the game affordable. But not everybody can do that, and not everybody does that and thinks about the choices they're making. They're just like, Mishra's Factory, it's expensive, it's good, I'm going to throw it in this deck.
Right.
Mishra's Factory maybe should be played in like 1, maybe 2 decks, and probably not even then.
Yeah, like some amount.
I'm sorry, not Factory, Workshop. Factory's the manland. Workshop's the one that makes 3 mana.
Right. Yeah, like, I mean, there's some argument for some decks that want Workshop, but not like a ton.
But it's like 1 or 2, right? Maybe Teshar, maybe Joyra.
Maybe.
I don't
know. Even then, probably Ancient Tomb and City of... And
yeah. I mean,
Traders.
I've played it in Joyra. It was okay. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
But that deck was okay. It wasn't great. So...
Poor Rip P Engine made it go bye-bye. So... Well, and
someone else's sins.
Well, and like I know. Well, so and that's another kind of like the other thing that I've kind of noticed, and is people's kind of like natural mentality. Like before COVID happened, and this was definitely something that happened before COVID. Like I would like to preference that because now that everybody's playing on webcam, the acceptance of proxies is actually much more universal than it was even like this time last year. Like if I mentioned the word proxy somewhere, like half the time I'd get dagger eyes, half the times I wouldn't. And
I mean, even with our Michigan meetups, there were some people where we had to say, "Look, you should consider proxying this." Like, we're
oh my
cool
god, yeah, we like almost had to like make them
do it.
Yeah. Well, and we did. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I started one of the reasons why I kind of promoted the Michigan meetups early on was that I could set the tone for what the meetups were, and one of those things was proxying or allowing it and not being an issue,
right?
And to kind of help lower, it lowers that barrier of entry, which I mean we're playing casually, like,
right?
I mean, don't get me wrong, I own enough cards to build 2 of any tier cEDH deck at a time, minus Time Twister. Like, I have Blood Pod and Najeela built right now. I could swap out Blood Pod for Godo. I could swap out Najeela for CST if I don't play Twister. So, and
I'm in a really similar boat, but like I'd rather play against somebody who's using the resources they've got to the best of their ability. So if that means you've put together a deck with the cards you own and you're proxying the rest, awesome. That's what I want to see.
Or it's your first, week or 2, and you're getting them, or just whatever. Like, like there's definitely like a certain, like if he showed up to our meetup, like to the Lansing group, like, and even with a $500 deck, they just get stomped all day long, essentially, or it would just be 3 DH all day.
Yeah.
But like,
I mean, even against our fringest of fringe decks, like we had a guy playing. He was testing Nazan for a while, the green-white dude who tutors up. And, like, was it the best deck ever? No. But was it, like, okay-ish at times? Absolutely. Now, he ultimately decided to go in a different direction, but even that would really do more than a $500 deck would do, assuming an average hand, right? Well, that's the other thing, too.
Speed.
Yeah. The other thing with budget decks and being results oriented, which you don't want to do, is that you can get a really good hand on a budget deck and beat a mediocre hand from another deck
Yeah.
if somebody, just stumbles on mana for a couple
Yeah.
turns or
I
whatever.
just kind of found like
And
having a deck full of dorks and two CMC rocks, like,
yeah,
you're just slower. Like I can play
yeah,
Kess all day long, and I can cast Kess on turn 3 every game,
mhm,
but then I don't have free
right,
counter spells, or I don't have enough tutors, or
right.
you know what I
But
mean.
if
I
you're
can't
playing
add
against
Nauseous Deep.
if you're playing against like one person who hits one land and then misses two land drops, and then two other players
Mm-hmm.
who interact with each other a bunch, you might steal a win. And if you internalize that and say, "Well, I won. This must be good enough,"
Right.
that's going to lead you down a path that isn't going to help you
No.
grow.
But now when I take those budget lists and I go and play them at, like, I played them at a couple of command fests, and I keep one on hand, like when I go to LGSs and stuff. So that
Mm-hmm.
way I have something that, like, doesn't completely turn eyes. Like, I let people look at I'm like, here, take a look. Tell me if you want to play against this.
Yeah.
Most of the time they're like, okay, like, it's got shock lands and it's an Adnos deck and it has no fetches, so sure, we'll do it. You know what I mean? And it still performs pretty good. Sometimes it performs a little too well, and sometimes I can't answer a turn 2 Ulamog.
Right.
You know.
I have it used to be $100. It's probably closer to 200 now, but I have a low budget Yisan deck that kind of was the same deal, where
Mm-hmm.
it can perform in a high power pod perfectly admirably. It can perform in a mid power pod, like it can do different things.
Right.
But like, would I take it to a full bore cEDH table?
Tournament?
No, absolutely not.
Well,
Absolutely
so that's one of the other kind of things I've noticed, is that a lot of times, especially when you get offline, playgroups aren't like purely cEDH.
no. There's a lot of blending at the edges,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Yeah.
think is probably. I think it's one of the hardest things when people talk about like power levels of decks is that
Right.
there are not well defined borders, and usually they disregard how people are playing. So I can play that Yisan deck pretty laid back and casually, and it would
Right.
be a mid to high power thing.
Right.
But if I play it as tightly as possible,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be cEDH, but it's going to be right on the border, even with such a low budget.
It'll be high power, which is mostly
Right.
where these budget decks fall in anyway.
Yeah.
But like, that's the thing, is like, I've noticed, like, when I go to an LGS, or I go to a different play group, like, there might be the guy playing, like, oh, I don't know, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but like the last local play group that I had around here in my area, Michigan, like, they were all playing, like, mid-power decks, but they were running dual lands and Force of Wills and mana drains and crypts and
Played a game
all of
against
that.
a guy playing Sursu, the black-white Demir guy, and it was, pretty solidly mid to maybe mid-high power.
Yeah.
But it ultimately won using like a cEDH combo. Used Top, Citadel, and Aetherflux, which, like, is it the most streamlined combo? No. Is it something that I might expect to show up at a cEDH table every once in a while? Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes.
Rarely,
Right.
but I
I mean,
wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, I wouldn't kick it out of bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely wouldn't say it's a 10, but
A two-bagger?
yeah, last call. One of them last call ladies. Yeah. But so I mean, it's like a thing. But whereas, like, so, like, oftentimes what had happened. So, like, I mean, I would just show up with, like, they were like, yeah, just show up. We don't care. So I would just play, like, my, try to attack with my little Timnas, and I'm like, oh, I can't attack because everybody's got a fucking 6/6, So I actually wound up making a separate version of Blood Pod to play against those guys, because that's actually what started lead me into playing with all the extra fatties and reanimation spells. Was so that I could effectively punch through their Omnath. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there are some cards that we play in cEDH decks that are very tuned to playing other cEDH decks. Like, probably the best example is Miscast. Like, if you take Miscast to a mid-power level table, what the hell that card's going to do? Not
Metal
a damn
Misstep.
thing.
Metal Misstep.
Misstep's another great example. Carpet of Flowers. Sometimes it'll be okay. Sometimes it's
Yeah,
not
Carpet's
going to do
probably
a ton.
good. Yeah. I'm trying to think of like a good example. Um, mm,
A lot of it's usually the interaction package, like
Praetor's Grasp.
yeah, Praetor's Graphs, great example, or Mnemonic Betrayal.
Oh
Like
God, yeah, yeah. Mnemonic Betrayal is complete garbo and mid.
even Dockside, like in cEDH, people are talking about like, oh, my Dockside can make like 5 treasures on turn 1. Like, okay, in mid power, your Dockside might make 5 treasures on turn 4.
Um, so
Sometimes more. Sometimes more.
I was gonna say my last game on PlayEDH testing a budget deck. I was playing a budgeted Pet Cemetery, and one of the guys was playing an Ulamog list, and my Dockside made 14 mana on turn 2.
All right, dude was playing colorless. Sometimes you're gonna hit that button that says nut, and you're just gonna slam it.
Give me squirrels. Give me well. And then one of the other guys like got mad at me. And I'm like, dude, he just cast an Ulamog on turn 2. Why are you yelling at me because I killed you guys? Like, what am I supposed to do? Like,
These things do happen.
yes. It was anecdotal evidence. It was fun.
Yes.
I was just
No,
like,
right. And that's the thing. Like anything that we say, like anything that anybody hears out of this entire video, like you can't take it as gospel truth either. Like
Please
this
don't.
this is two dudes' opinion, and you're gonna find examples that disprove us, and you should, right?
and I don't need to hear them either. Like,
Yeah.
just my friend. Like,
We know that sometimes we're not right. Believe me.
And I know that
I'm
like
wrong a lot.
my Dockside example was just anecdotal counter argument for the sake of just for the hell of it. And I know that like there's been like 15 games where I've had a Dockside and I'm just like, why is everybody just playing Forest Pass?
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
happened 3 games at a Command Fest where I was playing like power level 7 with a budget list. And I tend to play the non-blue ones, like so that way I'm not playing Oracle Consult and like mid and high power. So I tend to test those kind of lists a lot more in that area. But yeah, it was like, I don't know, maybe like 10 games, and I'm just like, this Dockside's never going to do anything. So I was just like, Forest Dork, cast Timna on 3, kind of thing.
There's some things that really scale with power, and Dockside is a great example of something that really scales with power.
Yeah. Hull Breacher's the same way, I think.
Yeah, Hull Breacher, definitely. Probably Opposition Agent too. Like, even the idea of...
I think Op Agents probably, because lower power levels still play tutors, they just don't play as efficient ones.
I mean, that's fair. I think that in terms of, like, Opposition Agent as a stacks piece, I think it's more relevant for us, simply because, like, the prevalence of fetch lands is much higher.
Yeah. No, I
Like,
see what you're saying.
It can be played proactively in cEDH. I don't think a lot of people do that, but in theory you could.
Right.
Whereas in mid power you're gonna like snag somebody's cultivate, which is kind of a dick move.
Oh, that's so dick move. Plus, there's that whole like the other thing with cEDH is the or with not cEDH but with EDH Commander, is like that unwritten rule of like not like no MLD kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that's very much like a kind of like a thing. So
where Armageddon gets you the double birds and Blood Moon gets you the side eye. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It does. Like Blood Moon gives you the stank eye, but Armageddon and then Dirtling for 2 more hours will get you not asked back.
Yeah.
If you know
Armageddon's a win con, people. Not in cEDH, but Armageddon needs to be a win con. You need to play it and then win the game on that turn or the following turn. You can't just sit there and...
Yeah, like not even if you have a Blightsteel Colossus in play. Like they need to die.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially.
You gotta end the game.
Yeah. So I think that kind of gives us like a nice little... I mean, we're at about an hour and 15-minute mark on this. I guess kind of the last little thing that I wanted to kind of tie in together was like, and just to reiterate, is that knowing the meta is really good kind of getting some data about the meta. And when I say the meta, I don't mean necessarily the meta at large, where I'm discussing the meta that you're going to be playing in. Like, albeit play EDH, albeit, you know, your local play group that just plays over webcam now because of the pandemic, like, whatever. And that was one of the things that, like, with the Metagame Project, like, I'd always kind of, I mean, since I know you locally, I've heard you kind of talk about, like, you get these pockets of, like, you get these, like, almost like clusters of data from, like, certain play groups.
Yeah.
I know you're, like, at one point you were getting, like, a ton of Teshar submissions from, like, one
and, like,
group.
Currently I'm getting a ton of Elsha submissions. And, like, nothing wrong with that, right? It's cool. It skews the data, which means it's not perfect, but
Right.
no one is claiming it is. So, you know, sometimes the Metagame Project says this. I'm like,
Right.
But, like, to go along with that, not just knowing, you know, what the meta you're walking into is, but, like, talk to people about it. Mm-hmm. This is EDH. Like, Rule 0 exists for a reason.
It does.
Talk to your play group. Talk to people who are active on the server you're going to. Don't be a dick about it. Have an open mind.
Yeah.
People are going to have differences of opinion. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're wrong. Talk about it.
Well, and a lot of players, like, you can simply just go and like, because like, let's be honest, we're playing multiplayer because we want to play with 3 people and not just, you know.
We want to shoot the shit. We want to talk to buddies. We want to crack jokes.
Right. Crack jokes, have a good time. I mean, otherwise we play 1v1.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
We play on Arena, right? Where there's no interaction whatsoever.
Right. You know, you just make that cat go across all day or whatever.
Jam the GG button.
Yeah. But, well, then, like, that's the thing. Is, like, people have, like, a certain wheelhouse of decks they play, and, like, if you just go in and, like, say, hey, what is it, you know, see what everybody's playing, while you're kind of formulating, like, what to build, that will, like, is in your wheelhouse of decks that you normally play, B, will play decently well into that meta, and C, is a budget based on the power level of those decks in that meta. You can have success, and that success might be $100 deck. That success might be $500. It might have to be $750, like, as like a from scratch budget.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, if you're gonna go to a certain place and have the expectation of playing there, you know, certain places might have certain expectations, and one of those might be that you need to proxy, right? Sometimes that's going to happen. Sometimes you're going to go to a place and you're going to say, I want to play here, and they're going to say, great, we use Trice, and you're going to play digitally. Like, you got to know what to expect.
Right. You have to adapt to your audience, essentially, is the kind of the crux of that. But basically just kind of, like, have that those conversations are important, especially when you're new to the group, and what budget you can get away with is definitely dependent upon the power level and the budget of what your friends and what your new play group or established play group is doing. And unfortunately, like, that can be a little uncomfortable, but it's very, very necessary.
And sometimes you might have to make decisions that can slide, right? So if you want to play in a certain place online and they expect a certain level, it might be different than your budgeted group that you play with in person.
Or your budget.
And you might have to, right, you might have to take that into account. And maybe you have 2 lists for the same commander. One's
online,
your budgeted. Yeah, exactly.
Group A, Group B, whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
It can be extra work, but it can also be beneficial in the end if you are expanding your own play groups and play abilities.
Right. It'll give you a better play experience. It'll give your opponents a better play experience because I would assume, just because of playing multiplayer, that the hope is that those opponents will also be friends when the game is over. Because otherwise I would just play, like we were saying, arena or 1v1. And just realizing it and seeing it off of, like, kind of seeing this report kind of routinely and gave me a couple of those ideas. And then the last part is that not only do you want to consider those factors when you're picking a deck or building a deck, but you also want to have something that you can scale. Like if you start out with a $500 deck and you do play in a proxy meta or online meta, and you actually want to paper it out and own those cards, pick a deck that you'll stick with, or colors that you'll stick with, because a lot of times if you build Grixis, then you can build pretty much every Grixis deck because they're all going to have Tainted Pact in them, and that's $80 every deck you build. They're all going to have Oracle, they're all going to have Mana Crypt, they're all going to have Vault.
And if you're one of those people who bounces around between things a lot, pick up the staples, right? Fetch lands, the rocks, eventually duels, shocks, things like that. The things that are going to be kind of the core, no matter what you're looking at.
Right.
If you want to play lots of different things.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the thing was so the way I kind of like to do it is you stick to that wheelhouse. You can build Grixis, but then you can kind of branch out to Sands Green, or you can branch out to Sands White, or you start out with Red Green, and then you build into Jund, and then Jund can either turn into Sands Blue or branch into Sands whatever, and you kind of build okay, I eventually want to play these 3 decks or these 4 decks or these 2 decks, but I'm gonna start out with the 2-color one that will branch into 3-color ones, or a 4-color and a 2-color. You know what I mean? And kind of
if anybody out there is a player of RTS games, the skill branches, the trees that you get for
very much like that, and that will put those dollars to work the best, especially if you're not wanting to put ink in a printer,
and especially if we're going as we go into the second year of no big events, right? There's still we see reserve list prices going crazy because there's a real supply crunch out there.
Yeah.
Because there's no big events for people to buy, sell, and trade at.
Right. So people are either holding them or just scooping them up because they got nothing better to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've rambled long enough, old man.
Indeed.
So where can everybody reach you?
So I am available on most places as Squirrelmob. So you can email me, squirrelmob@gmail.com. You can find me on Reddit as Squirrelmob, or on Discord as Squirrelmob. The one place where I am not under the username Squirrelmob is on Twitter. If you'd like to reach me at Twitter, I am at Hoff Occultist, HOFF Occultist.
Every time.
Yeah, right. But I'm happy to talk with anybody about nearly anything. Cool. As long as you're not a jerk.
I'll link the Metagame Project and the survey and in the show notes. And thanks for joining me tonight, James. And
thanks for having me.
If you would like to help support us, you can go to Patreon and go to cEDH_budget _brews and give us a buck. It'll help out a lot. Help hosting with the website and equipment and things like that. And if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks, guys.
Slam that like.
Yeah. Have a good night. Bye.